It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And this Wellness Wednesday, we are talking distress tolerance. Now, I expect to get some people who won't be able to tolerate this video. And I'm talking about this because the phenomenon of people freaking out over fictional media is treated as, proof of some bigotry or this or that and the next thing. And I don't agree that's so. I believe that the freaking out over shows like Masters of the Universe and various comic book things and She-Hulk, you just say She-Hulk on the internet and it's countdown to somebody losing their shit about how awful it is. And this is all linked to a lack of distress tolerance when it comes to this sort of thing, but I argue also the rest of the world. I think it's a certain displaced inability to self-soothe. And people are already pissed off at me. Please watch the rest of this video before commenting. And if you like me eating shit so that the people who actually benefit from this stuff can benefit from this stuff, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK, because being a YouTuber and doing what I do requires a heavy degree of distress tolerance. People taking cheap shots at me, saying things that are intended to be hurtful and annoying, and not reacting. Now, distress tolerance does not mean things don't hurt, because then you wouldn't have to tolerate distress if there was no distress. Distress tolerance is not about feeling better. Distress tolerance is being able to handle difficult emotions while minimizing impulsive action. And it is a learned skill. It's being able to manage difficult things without getting overwhelmed and just acting. It's about not making things worse. And the problem with the way distress tolerance is handled is that it's discussed specifically in the context of disorders, right? You hear about it when you talk about bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, things like that. But there are plenty of people walking around without a diagnosis that struggle with this. I mean, there are not enough people out there with those conditions to explain the losing it over She-Hulk. And I want to be clear. It's one thing to the show's not your cup of tea. The show has settled down in the last few episodes, but those first two had that really exhausting Rick and Morty style pacing that I say exhausting because I find Rick and Morty exhausting. Just the blunt instrument humor, rapid fire, quick cuts, all that stuff. I don't enjoy Rick and Morty, which is why I think I'm surprised I like She-Hulk so much, because one of the criticisms I think are fair about the first couple episodes of that show is it was a bludgeon, it was too rapid fire. But not only do I notice people being unable to handle the distress of one of these nerd shows not being for them, but they also misread me when I'm comically sort of overselling a point to have fun with it. People are like, oh, she's melting down, she's freaking out. And I always find that really strange, because who the fuck would lose it over a piece of media like that? I mean, the closest experience I've ever had is walking out of It was X-Men 2. And Bryan Singer had made another prominent female X-Men character, Lady Deathstrike, mute. So Mystique barely said anything, and then Deathstrike barely said anything. And the thing that I found so depressing is there were legitimately good things about those movies. I mean, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine is probably, but Patrick Stewart was good as Xavier, and there were good elements of it, but the ongoing thing of the mute female action hero was just so, again, like, it was one of those things. I get why people like it, but this is a bummer. But I handled it, right? It's not going and freaking the fuck out. I mean, it's pretty, I've made it pretty clear I did not enjoy the Netflix Sandman show. Now, I know a lot of people who did, and I'll joke about it with Tristan on her stream, right? But that's the thing. It's a joke. It's a TV show. If people like it, they like it. If they don't like it, they don't like it. I don't feel the need to convert people to my way of thinking. And I really do see a lacking of distress tolerance in people's reactions to, I mean, The Lord of the Rings is another one, man. Like, maybe it's because I lived through the Star Wars prequels as an original trilogy fan. But I also just think that, and I don't want anybody to feel blamed for this, because I do think there are social elements that explain a general lack of distress tolerance in the population. I mean, the whole COVID lockdown thing really opened my eyes to the lack of resilience that a lot of people have, because the COVID lockdowns were not fun for anyone. Nobody enjoyed them. We sort of joked as introverts that, hey, it's finally our paradise, but that was a cope, right? People felt imprisoned in their own homes. It was hard. But watching people completely lose it to the point that they were taking leave of their senses and not doing the things designed to keep people safe. And I saw very, very smart people just going into fantasy land territory about the realities of that virus. And it just really looked like they couldn't cope with the enormity of what was going on. They were overwhelmed. And this is not a character flaw. This is a skills building thing. And I do think it's very important to talk about this stuff as a life skills thing and not a character thing, because too many of these things are treated as, well, if you think this way, you're a bad person. And then this is the spin cycle in politics right now, right? Somebody has a reaction based on a lack of distress tolerance. That is misunderstood to be some sort of character flaw. They get lumped in with groups like, say, the January 6th people who, shit in the hallways in the Capitol building. That triggers their lack of distress tolerance again. And then there's just cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. And politically okay, it may be a raw thing to a particular base, but nobody's thinking about a potential alternative reason why people may be having the reactions they do And you don't have to agree with the reaction. You don't have to validate the reaction to understand that it's not nefarious. It's not a character flaw. And I say the same thing as some of these people who get very authoritarian with social justice movements, that everything has to be just so for them because they can handle no distress whatsoever. You can't build distress tolerance with political cocoons. You're never going to build up this muscle by hiding out in echo chambers. It very much is very, very baby steps exposure therapy to get used to it. And I admit I'm very much hitting my threshold as of late because I've been dealing with some really, really unpleasant health problems that just wear me out, cause physical pain. And so I have to be acutely aware that things are going to hit me sideways. And one of the things that drives me crazy about the internet is people model this behavior of my haters are my motivators. No, they're not. No, they're not. Nobody's really motivated by a hater, right? Getting pissed off is not positive motivation. Getting pissed off that someone's being unfair does not give you a renewed love for your work. It's a defense mechanism. And yeah, people make a lot of money fighting with other people over bullshit, but it's going to affect their health eventually because unless they're a narcissistic sociopath, and then they're going to have other trouble. They're going to have other problems with their lives due to that narcissist wounding, the ensuing rage, and, the lack of impulse control. But for people who are not that, and I do think that the word narcissist is really overused. I think a lot of people that get labeled a narcissist are just lacking in distress tolerance. And I'm a big believer that you eliminate every other possibility before you slap a label like that on someone. Because those labels, unchecked narcissists are bad people who very likely will not accept help because they think the rest of the world is the problem, not them. Whereas a person who just needs increased distress tolerance, well, that's someone who can make some pretty major strides pretty quickly. And why throw that person away? Why give up on that person when there's that possibility? That's my attitude, right? Which is why I'm very loath to block anybody on this channel. I have started doing it more regularly because I have been getting complaints from other people. And I very much value certain contributors, people who leave certain comments. And I know that there's no way to make everyone happy with these decisions. I have to make judgment calls for what I think is the good of the channel. It causes me an extreme amount of stress, and I have to find a way to eat that because I recognize that most people, when they come to a YouTube channel, they don't give a shit, not in real terms. People like me are not real people to the people who leave nasty comments. We're monsters of a sort, and they create all these permission structures for being horrific to people. And I don't understand them. I don't want to understand them. I just know it's so. And then I have to go through the process of distress tolerance because things get worse, things get better. There are good times, there are bad times, and the goal is so the bad times don't sabotage the good. And that is an example of what they call, accept what's happening in the moment. There's this term that I don't like. I am a big proponent of DBT therapy. I don't like the terminology inherent in DBT therapy, and I'm trying to figure out different terms to explain a concept that just doesn't sound fucking stupid. Because the official term for the first step in improving your distress tolerance is radical acceptance, which sounds fucking bullshit, right? And it is kind of bullshit. It's not radical. It's not radical, sounds like radical, dude, right? It's just about not fighting the reality of what's happening to you. I lean more into sort of Randian philosophy about objective reality and facing hard truths. Like there just is objective reality, and run from it if you want. It's not going to help you. No, reality isn't all perception. You can delude yourself, but objective fact is real. And that was one of the things I had to really cling to because of the amount of gaslighting I've had happen to me with really serious abuse and stalking. And, you don't expect to get stalked. So a camera's not rolling when it happens. And, the thing they don't show well in media, the thing that the domestic violence experts and things like that don't talk about, is that people will lie. People who are your friends will lie and claim they didn't see things they did because they're so afraid of the dangerous person. And I had to just accept that. And I had to accept that, and I had to not try to control it. Because the more you try to control it, the more you try to pull a win out of an unwinnable situation, the more your brain reads it as a threat. And so you are actually ending up in a feedback loop of self-blame, where you're taking a situation that was not your fault, that you couldn't control, and creating these feelings of self-blame and this feeling like you should be able to control it, because people aren't taught to handle uncertainty as well as they could be. We go through this education system where it's all, study hard, you're guaranteed to get a good grade. Be responsible, be diligent, work yourself sick, and you will succeed. And then you get out into the real world that absolutely does not work that way. Or even while you're still in school, you end up in these interpersonal situations where it doesn't work that way. They aren't fair situations. It's not. And then that tightly constructed framework that people learn to navigate falls apart, and they have absolutely no resilience against unfairness. And again, that's not a character flaw. The skills weren't developed. And, there was some things that teachers did when I was in middle school and high school that they wouldn't be allowed to do today because parents would complain. But I believe it was to teach us that sometimes life's not fair. Sometimes you can do your best and not get an A+, and you got to learn to deal with that in life. So, that's the first thing. Just accepting does not mean what's happening feels good. Accepting does not mean that it's fair. And accepting does not mean that you deserved it. Accepting what's happening just means that what's happening to you is happening. It's real. Just acknowledge what's happening. Acknowledge it's shitty, right? Just get out of denial. Get out of displacement. Get out of projection. And then this next part is one that, that scene in Jessica Jones where they have her recite the street names from her childhood. That part drives me crazy because it's not, I get what they're doing in those moments, but it actually doesn't work because it's taking someone with past trauma and having them regress to the streets they grew up around in kind of misses the mark, but whatever. But you do something to sort of create a new sensation. The one that sort of got adopted in the neighborhoods I grew up in, majority black neighborhoods, people laugh. People laugh at unpleasant situations. People laugh when something sucks because it creates a new sensation in the body. And what's so amazing about these Afro-Caribbean diaspora communities is they manage to figure out a lot of this stuff on their own without the benefit of formal DBT therapy. But that's the sort of thing, you know, the laughing, the singing, the dancing, the music, all these things that it's like, oh, that's just right. They're creating a new state in the body. It's, you know, and people do some, I mean, a lot of the examples you'll see online have to do with stopping self-harming behaviors, right? But again, I think too much focus is put with this work on the absolute edge cases, the absolute worst of the worst, and not enough preventative emotional nutrition to stop people from getting there, right? I'll scribble on a pad of paper or something when I'm feeling anxious just to shake it off, right? I'm a doodler, and I stand by that. And I know some people are like, that's unprofessional. Fuck off, melting down is less professional than doodling. I don't care what anybody says. You know, deep breaths, fidgeting, all that stuff. People might find it annoying, and if I could take certain words out of the English language, that would be one, because if somebody is in a state of high distress, I'd rather they be a temporary inconvenience to people than completely overload and, you know, be unable to cope. Everybody's got some things they do that irk other people. When you're flinging that word around, you're showing a profound lack of self-awareness. Then there's, you know, and the funny thing is this is the next part of distress tolerance, the distraction thing. The occupy your mind is, I think, where some of the new sensation part, this overlap here. And this is where I think conventional therapy tends to break down, because a lot of therapists are coming at this from, they learned it, but they've never had to come back. And this is not true of everybody. Some therapists, you know, they go through their own struggles and then they get certified. But what's going to work for one physiology is going to have the exact opposite effect with another. And that's why, you know, the focus on heat and cold and this, that, the next thing. I mean, me, it was theater exercises where you just sort of shook everything out, shook out the tension. Like you did that as a rule before you did theater, because some of the poses in theater, modeling's the same way. They actually they're unnatural. You can get crampy if you don't warm up beforehand. So I don't know. I think certain things are just ingrained in you that your body knows, oh, that's what this is for. And so it just reverts to programming. So, you know, things like go people watching, some people would find that more anxiety inducing, right? Going to a cafe. A big one that doesn't work for me, but works for some people, is journaling. I actually feel more overwhelmed when I start focusing on, you know, this sort of thing. It's open world video games, preferably something with a great soundtrack. Movies don't even do it. Uh, Cooking is because it's an activity. I need an activity. I need steps I need to follow. So I'm completely focused on that and not whatever's overwhelming and distressing. But everybody's different. And the problem with this part of it is that people see it as being unproductive or wasting time or being lazy. And it's not. Maintaining your emotional equilibrium is not lazy, it's responsible. And this is one of those things where we can't change society whole cloth. It's just not possible. But that's why I'm a big believer in being selective of my immediate circle and people who, shame or deride that kind of self-care, recognizing that life is a marathon and not a sprint, and people aren't machines. They can't be just go, go, go productive all the time. Those people don't last with me. People who aren't team players, people who don't recognize, look, we all have to check our egos. We all have to background every so often. People that need credit for every single thing, like public credit, public adoration, they don't last long on my projects. It's just game dev is the wrong place for people like that. The respect of your team, yes, that's reasonable. Public adulation, wrong business. Just wrong business. And so those are, you need, and this is the thing that the distress tolerance elements of DBT don't factor in because it's part of another module. And I do think it needs to be a bit more interwoven, because without these supportive structures, it's very, very hard to do the distress tolerance work. If you don't have people you trust, this gets harder, right? Because then you get into self-soothing. And I find that, again, the suggestions for self-soothing, I mean, DBT therapy was developed by a woman, and so I find that the suggestions are very feminized. So you can imagine how well they work for me. Light a candle. Okay, what did that do? Right? Fire. Okay, whatever. I don't feel better. Something's on fire now, but I don't feel better. Some people that works, right? But that's where we get into, for a lot of people, things like video games or anime or something like that. These are the things that soothe them. And these are the things that get shamed. And that's why I think that distress tolerance is so low in those particular mediums, because you're taking people with already low distress tolerance and taking away and shaming and demonizing one of their copes. What did you think was going to happen? And again, I can't change the entire discourse around this stuff. I can only reach out a hand for people, but people have to be willing to take it. And that's part of my acceptance. And that's where we get to problem solving. And I know that I glossed over self-soothing, but that is so specific, that is so individualized. Do something you like, and I maintain, don't just do something you like when something bad has happened, because that makes you associate the anime or the gaming and things like that with bad events, with stress. Schedule that time into your week so you get the regular decompression, because otherwise it's just going to get associated in your brain with bad times, and people will lose interest in the activity for obvious reasons, right? And then once all that's done and you've found equilibrium, then you start to decide what to do about it. You will not get a more snarly Leanna than when people are demanding a snap decision from me about something. Because no, I have to work the steps. You want a good decision? You'll give me 10 or 15 minutes to think about it. And I just find that do something. What is it? What's your make your choice? Pressure. That's bullshit. And I push back on it really, really hard. Because I know in the long term, it's unhealthy. You have to make snap decisions. They're usually not very good. Then you get punished for the split-second decision you had to make when you weren't ready, when you were off balance, and it's just a loop again. And the people forcing you into these situations don't care. And at first, it's hard to recognize how few people in the world truly see you as a human being and don't care about you. But once you get comfortable with that acceptance, one, your expectations totally change. Because, okay, if somebody cares about you and what was best for you, okay, you want to work with them, right? But if somebody depersons you, you don't owe them anything. So they can fucking wait. And then you do really gain an appreciation for the people who do step up and the people who do care. Because you differentiate those people that are worth your time, energy, and trust from the slavering hordes that are essentially just noise. And being a YouTuber, finding the balance, because obviously YouTube is all driven to either riling up or appeasing the hordes, which is completely counter to what I'm trying to do with my content, which is give individual people things to either understand the world better or, be happier or feel more balanced or more in control of their own lives. And so, the content I do is not a good fit for YouTube. I accept that, right? I've been trying to navigate it. It's still trial and error, working on it. But, this is one of those things where no one can soothe you if you can't self-soothe. And if you find yourself really flying off the handle about media, again, this is not a character flaw. This is not you doing something wrong. It's an indication that you deserve better in terms of distress tolerance. And there are things you can do to make things that make you feel pained, frightened, or attacked seem less big. And since that's available to you, isn't it worth at least attempting these steps so that this stuff doesn't burn like fire, right? I think it's much more preferable. Anyway, if you like this content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Patreon support is greatly appreciated and needed because of the nature of this stuff. The YouTube algorithm doesn't like it. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it, who can't afford it, so people can get targeted help with distress tolerance. Coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching and be well.